Here's an idea. Trigger warnings in college classrooms don't restrict speech, they create it. There is a moral panic gripping the nation, and by extension, the internet. And while, like most moral panics, it does involve material which could imaginably offend some sensibilities, the moral panic isn't really about that material directly. The moral panic is about moral panic, specifically on college campuses. The panic panics thusly. College is a place where one is expected to confront all manner of unfamiliar, difficult, and in many cases unpleasant ideas. What are both teachers and students to do if those ideas can be considered emotionally or psychologically harmful? Art which depicts rape or violence, literature which discusses racism or sexism, movies which show abuse, assault, or war. If students are either uncomfortable or literally unable due to anxiety to interact with certain subject matter, what's their course of action? What's the responsibility of the instructors teaching that material? To avoid it because it can cause upset? To teach it anyway and tell their students to just grin and bear it? Should they warn their students ahead of time that things could get grim? This last thing, warnings, trigger warnings specifically, have been a big topic of conversation and the source of said aforementioned moral panic. Moral panic. Trigger warnings, like the one at the beginning of this video, are bits of text letting people know the following discussion may include content that triggers their anxiety or PTSD. Trigger warnings, the story goes, started on the internet in feminist spaces as a way to warn assault, abuse, rape, and other survivors that certain conversations in those spaces entail those topics. Because, I mean, hey, you need a place to talk about those things, right? Communities on the internet form around many things, shared traumatic experiences amongst them. And in case your peers don't want to be exposed to that stuff, why not spend some extra characters warning them up front? No big. The complaint is that trigger warnings have crossed some boundaries. They moved from private spaces to larger, more public spaces. First, to places on the internet like Tumblr. Trigger warnings in the tags of Tumblr posts, for instance, allow people to block content before it even reaches their eyeballs. And now, as the internet continues to leak into meat space, as it does, trigger warnings have found their way into college classrooms. Some teachers do willingly provide, and some students have requested warnings for difficult and potentially offensive material. The worry about such warnings is that if students might respond to obliquely offensive educational content with moral panic, then teachers, feeling pressured to adjust or simply unable to teach certain material, lose their academic freedom. Plus, the worry continues, we exacerbate an already out-of-hand problem. The psychological oversensitivity of millennials, a population caricatured as so willingly offended they can barely walk through the produce section at the grocery store. So fragile, all of them. Those against trigger warnings often say that college prepares one for the real world, whatever that is, and that there are no trigger warnings in the real world. By requesting them, you're admitting difficult stuff should be handled with kid gloves and encouraging intolerance of difficulty in others. This line of thinking often claims that exposure is the best cure for PTSD, and besides, who are students or university administration for that matter to dictate what instructors should or shouldn't say? By requesting or providing trigger warnings, you're indicating that there is awful stuff that shouldn't be discussed and are therefore limiting the expression of others. Come on, they might say. There's awful stuff out there in the world and you can't protect yourself from it, so college is a great place to build up your tolerance. Conversely, we can see how there are trigger warnings in the real world. They're just not normally called that. And maybe exposure is the best medicine for PTSD, but the process is long and painful with possible violent side effects depending upon its cause, source. Which is sort of besides the point because instructors aren't psychiatric professionals providing mental health care for their students. If students have legit mental health issues, their course of care should not be determined or administered by their studio art instructor. This point is moot, though, because academic trigger warnings are not, as many people seem to assume, a way to avoid or censor topics. They're actually quite the opposite. It is possible online to create a filter bubble powered by trigger warnings to completely block that which you find unpleasant, but trigger warnings in classrooms are not trigger warnings on Tumblr. They don't act as blinders or remove the expectation or responsibility that one interact with upsetting material. Classroom trigger warnings announce that material so it can be confronted. They don't stop conversation. They make it possible by allowing students to prepare themselves. Academic trigger warnings aren't shields or armor, but rather, if we really want to stick with this kind of weird combat metaphor, a horn sounding a charge, an encouragement to face down that which is difficult. As Caroline Heldman, politics professor at Occidental University, put it to Sarah Seltzer for FlavorWire, trigger warnings allow me to have a conversation, to say, this is not a class about your personal life. This actually helps make the class more academic, and it has the benefit of letting students prepare for what might come, end quote. In other words, trigger warnings don't restrict speech, they make speech possible. And not just possible, but more collegiate. They're an encouragement for students who need it to muster up some grit and perspective, and in the event they can't, work with their instructor to find an alternative to participation so their personal anxiety doesn't limit group discussion. Of course, I think lots of discussion about trigger warnings isn't really about trigger warnings. It's sort of the same way a couple might argue at the grocery store about what kinds of apples to buy. They're not really arguing about apples. They're navigating a whole complex network of preference, economics, personal history, memory, probably even aesthetics. It's never really about apples. The apples just kind of get caught in the middle and become a symbol for them working through their stuff. Similarly, this is not, I don't think, about trigger warnings, but about the power dynamic between colleges, teachers, and students, and the fear that that dynamic is easily swayed when someone says, I'm offended. If people are saying they're offended to just get out of classwork or to avoid situations which are uncomfortable but not psychologically distressing, hey, that's bad. Don't do that. But there is a view of the college teacher-student relationship that positions students not unlike customers. They're paying money, they should be made happy, and colleges should regulate accordingly to make sure that that's the case. Another view says that colleges are purpose-built for confronting difficult ideas, and avoiding those ideas is missing the point entirely, if not ruining the world. A third view says that colleges are actually less homogeneously institutional than we tend to think, and really, this is a problem of community. The solution will always be different for different colleges, if not different classrooms at different times. A sort of you do you, I'll do me approach. Colleges should be responsive. Students should, and I think do, generally want to interact with difficult ideas in an environment that's both challenging and supportive, but educational policies are not one size fits all. There's no magic formula for finding that balance. This is made all the more difficult by the fact that instructors, especially TAs and adjuncts, are overworked, underpaid, and treated as disposable. So there's a culture of fear, like they have to do what's right, but yeesh, which right? Also, universities as institutions have necessarily become more economically focused in the past decades. Resources are tight, which can cause them to be slow and frequently either ham-fisted or misguided in their attempts to support students who need it while not alienating those who don't. This leaves students to either figure it out for themselves, which, I mean, no offense college students, but that could really go either way, or to confront their instructors who see above. Trigger warnings are the apples of a discussion about what college should do. Specifically, the fact that college, as a singular, massive monolith, is a powerful institution that naturalizes certain ideas about the world. And here by naturalize, I mean makes things seem natural or given, even if they're not. On a large scale, I think people are responding to the implied question of whether college is a place where difficulty is confronted. For many of us, myself included, that seems natural. Of course it is. Does it have to be, though? No, there's no law that demands that be the case. But on a different scale, there's a question of whether that which is difficult or disturbing in general is being naturalized. For many people, again, myself included, distressing stuff feels like an inevitable component of many, if not most, areas of study. What is suggested, I think, by people requesting or providing trigger warnings in classrooms is that that's not necessarily the case. It's not that we should avoid talking about awful junk. It's that when we do talk about awful junk, we should try to avoid thinking of it as natural. It's by explicitly acknowledging and discussing the traumatic up front that we open it up for study alongside whatever broader topic it fits into. If we don't do that, it just sits there, unannounced, seemingly inextricable from the larger subject matter. When in reality, rape is not just another plot device. Militarized zones are not just a place where things are tense because of a political vacuum, and suicide is not just the result of mental illness. Insofar as college can institutionalize the naturalization, the unquestioning acceptance of these things and things like them as part and parcel with history, culture, art, or science by not acknowledging that they are worthy of an upfront confrontation, maybe it perpetuates the idea that they are just rape, just war, just suicide. I think this discussion asks if that's really the case. What do you guys think? What are the pros and cons of trigger warnings in college classrooms? And do you find them to be the apples of a larger conversation? Let us know in the comments, and I will respond to some of them in next week's comment response video. In this week's comment response video, we talk about your thoughts regarding makers and open source things. If you want to watch that one, you can click right here or find a link in the doobly-doo. This week's episode was brought to you by the hard work of these easily offended millennials. We have a Facebook and IRC and a subreddit, links in the doobly-doo. And the tweet of the week comes from Giraffe My Zero, who points us towards a piece about the aesthetic of sarcasm as it relates to Banksy's Dismaland, which it's a good read. I enjoyed this one. I got a lot of thoughts about sarcasm and also Banksy.